Good morning, everybody. It's half past ridiculous, and we're seeking essential mentium. Last week, we touched on the seven elements of jurisdiction and how they apply, and we also touched on licensing and registration and what those things actually are, and why they would be claimed to be needed. In some cases, certainly, I can definitely see how a license would be required in certain instances, but for the most part, it's all deception, and most people don't require that permission to simply go about their lives. And personal responsibility certainly comes into it. As we say, it comes into all of these aspects. You'll hear that quite often in the things that we talk about. So, don't assume that by doing these processes, you're going to get away with something, because that's not what this is about. This isn't about circumventing legal process or law process or lawful process. This is about ensuring that the process that you are obligated to engage in is, in fact, lawful. And this is where a lot of these things fall down, is because legal and lawful are two completely different things. And just because it's legal doesn't mean it's lawful. But if it's lawful, it must be legal. And this is also a distinction that the courts and the so-called authorities don't tend to look at. They seem to be stuck in a vacuum, and they only look at the legal aspects of this. Because if they looked at the lawful aspects of this, they couldn't operate. So it's understandable that they're not going to be looking at these things unless they actually, actually are required to by the process that you engage in, and that's where we're working on here is showing different aspects of a process that you can engage in, not only to open eyes, particularly. The frontline groups, I brought this up last week. Don't try to stuff this stuff down the throat of the frontline groups, because they don't know. The guy at the front desk hasn't got a clue. But if we can educate them...
He's basically you, isn't he, John? He's basically you and I at the front desk who's just working for a couple of dollars an hour.
Yeah, I mean...
So that guy is not going to know anything.
It's just his job. They've given him a guidelines. This is what you got to follow. This is what has to happen. And typically they're not going to question it. But if we can get them to question it, if we can get the frontline groups to understand this stuff, so that when their superiors come up to them and go, you have to do it this way, they go, well, there's several other ways. Why are we only doing it this way? And, it's the questioning. Getting as many people as possible to simply question the processes that's going to make the difference, rather than all the paperwork and, forcing the hand. That works on an individual basis, but we're looking at a global change. And the only way we're going to get this global change is just to get people to question this stuff. And if enough people question it, it has to change. Because the people who are writing these ridiculous rules and forcing them down our throats, they're relying on our ignorance and deceptive acts and practices in order so that they can hide what they're doing and allow what they're doing to occur. Once those things are questioned, then that ignorance and the deceptive acts and practices fall down, and then they have to act correctly. And this is the big thing about this. I'm sure, Carl, that you've encountered this sort of thing in what you were doing, where, if somebody, questions the process no longer works anymore.
Yeah, exactly. For those that don't know, that I used to be a cop back in England. Actually retired many years ago now, so procedures may well be different, but we were told the basics of the legislation, and there were a certain set number of elements to any particular offence. And to establish that an offence had been committed, you typically followed a certain procedure. The basic one is stopping somebody on the street for, vehicle offences. Firstly, you had to identify that they'd done something wrong before you were even allowed to stop them. At that point, you then had to establish what the offence was, had they committed the offence or admitted to committing the offence, and at that moment, the process was almost complete. The next step was to just get the name, the date of birth, and the address for the summons, and that was it. But of course, anybody who throws a spanner in that process and a bit of a monkey wrench in there, you can stop that process from taking place. Now, what happens when you do that depends on the police officer that stops you. If he's just going to give up and say, oh, okay, this guy obviously knows what he's talking about, I'm not even going to bother, and it's a nothing, off you go, have a nice day. Or he's going to get on the radio and call for some backup, maybe even a supervisor, and then they start smashing windows and all sorts of nastiness can occur. But that also depends on you and how you react and how he reacts. So yeah, there's a lot you can do to make changes in how the authorities and perceived authorities, from the police right the way through to government agencies, tax agencies, and so on. There's lots of things you can do to make them step back a little bit and make them question what it is that they're actually doing. Sometimes it works, and sometimes they'll just get moved on to somebody else, and then it's your persistence, I should say, that's going to win out.
Yeah.
One of the things I think that sorry, John, I just wanted to finish on this little note. One of the things that is our problem is that everything we do in life, we do simply because that's the way it's done. You're told that's the way it is, so do it this way. That goes right the way from getting, childbirth in a hospital, getting licenses for marriage, getting a social insurance number, being employed. There's a whole host of things that we take for granted because we're told that's the way it is. Nobody has really asked the question, well, why? Why do we do it this way? And what's the alternative? And that's, I think, where we're at. We want you guys to know what is the alternatives and why it's done this way. It's not for your benefit. It's not for your benefit at all.
Yeah. When I was working with the World Freeman Society years and years ago, invariably, we would have people come in and debate with us. And one of the first questions we'd ask is, well, do you possess a driver's license? And pretty much all of them said yes. And then the next question was, did you read the Motor Vehicle Act before you went and got the license? And invariably, without fail, they said no. I have no idea what's even in that document. So how do they even know they require it? And the answer to that was, well, everybody knows you need one. Well, no, not everybody knows you need one. I know you don't need one because I've read the Motor Vehicle Act. I've taken it apart step by step. I've looked at it very, very carefully, and I realize what it is, what it's for, what the legislation's all about, and where the remedy is as far as not requiring permission to go from point A to point B in a total private capacity. With the licenses, with driver's licenses, there's all kinds of information out there. And there's one document, I've got it on my computer. I'll post it in with the archive, and it goes through it. It's a huge document, and there's a ton of information in there, and that's only just a drop in the bucket as far as what's available out there. Now, touching on what Carl was just mentioning, none of this is without risk. Okay, don't get me wrong. You can't just wave a piece of paper and these people are going to bow down and okay. There's always going to be risk. There's always going to be the chance that somebody's going to whack you over the head with something heavy. And if you're not willing to take that risk, don't even attempt to walk into this process. because without that risk, you have no credibility. If you're not willing to lose anything, you there's nothing that you can do. There's no one is going to take you seriously. The more you're willing to risk, the more seriously you're going to be taken. And it's a maxim in law that credibility is the basis for, or sacrifice is the basis for credibility. So unless you're willing to sacrifice, unless you're willing to lose and take that risk, don't even try, please, because you're not going to get anywhere with this. And if you don't have anything to lose, then why are you even doing it in the first place, right? It's the folks who they are being oppressed. Their lives are being damaged by this sort of thing. Those are the people that we're after and we're looking for, because they're the ones that are actually going to be serious about this and learn the process properly. So
I think the other thing as well, John, is that there are other things that we have spoken about that simply allow people to gain some power back, because you've just mentioned, they feel oppressed. They feel that they have nowhere to go and nothing to do, that there are a set number of rules and regulations that they have to abide by, and that's it. You know, the social contract, society says that it must be done this way. I must accept it. But that's not true. There are lots of things that we can, tools, let's say, that we can give to you, information that we can give to you that will allow you to lose the fear of the authorities and the perceived authorities and their actions over you. And it's happening more and more. There's an awful lot that's going on in the UK at the moment, because there are people that are being pushed out of their homes. There are people who are having bailiffs come knocking on their door looking to take their property from them and using pieces of paper with a stamp on it, or in most cases, no stamp on it. And that's the problem. So there are things that we can do and give to you that will give you some power to be able to fight back a little bit. And even if it's not an actual fight, then just question. Don't accept that somebody's knocked on your door and they want to walk in. You can put your shoulder against that door. You don't even have to open it. Same with a telephone call. Doesn't matter. They call you, they knock on your door. You don't have to pick up. You don't have to answer. Unless, of course, there's some pre-existing contract or agreement that really does allow that. But that's something, again, that we have to look into on maybe a case-by-case basis. But the steps that we also talk about that John was actually referring to there, these are the ones that you're going to get a real big pushback, because this kind of information and this stuff, they don't want people to know. They don't want that information out there, and they will push back hard to protect that, for the simple reason that once that stuff gets out, it's the collapse of their system.
Yes,
which is realistically what we want. Because a slow collapse.
Not so much a collapse of the system. Okay, that can be misconstrued. What we're looking for is a reformation of the system, a return to honesty, to honorability, and to the rule of law, which they're not following now, right? Like, I have been accused of being lawless. I don't care about law, and that's not true. I do care about law. I care about the actual harm, loss, damage aspect of it. Okay, the common law background that all of this stuff was originally based on. And without that, we have, I'm not going to say anarchy, because that word is misconstrued as well. Anarchy simply means you're not governed. So yes, in that aspect, yes, I'm an anarchist. But I'm not governed because I don't need to be. I don't go out and cause harm. I'm not a warmonger. I'm not a bully. I seek to assist my neighbors and my community rather than try to get something from it without having to return anything. That's the big thing about this. And where was I going to go with this? Oh, man.
You probably didn't want me...
the questioning.
Yeah, there you go.
When, if you don't question the process, okay, as a really in-your-face, simple example, if you don't question the process, some guy can knock on your door, wave a folded-up piece of paper, say, I have a warrant, I'm searching your house. If you don't question that warrant, or apparent warrant, you don't know if it's a blank piece of paper or if it's his power bill, or if it is an actual lawful warrant, right? You have to question this stuff. You have to take responsibility for your own actions, for your own life, and make sure that those people who are interfering in your life are doing so in the proper manner and for the proper reasons. That's what this is about. That's what this all of this whole discussion is about. Is learn the
and
question.
If you're in fear, if you happen to be on the receiving end of that kind of stuff and you don't know what to do, you just accept the fact that this guy who apparently has all this bravado and authority and a piece of paper and has the right to enter your home, you don't know any different, then you're going to let it happen.
Yeah, I mean,
when you don't have to. The point is, you don't have to. If you question the legality of that piece of paper, his authority, and everything else that goes along with it. And believe me, the sense of achievement and empowerment by standing up to a process like that you can verify is not legal and most certainly not lawful, it's incredible. It's something that makes you feel so great that you just want to do more.
Yep.
You question more, and then you talk to your friends more, and you empower them because they're going through a similar process maybe. Well, this is what it's all about.
I mean, everybody's going through essentially the same stuff in different modes, in different methods, but it's all, basically the same stuff. You got mortgages, you got licenses, you've got these supposed regulations. Most of them, like most of the regulations, don't apply. City ordinances, right? If the city is a corporation, if you're not a member of that corporation, their rules don't mean anything to you unless you accept them, and because it's all about consent. And when I brought that up, they really didn't like that very much. I mean, show me that I'm a member of this corporation, and they go, "Oh, well, you don't have to be. You're in the city." And physical proximity has nothing to do with it, because we're talking about an esoteric idea of a corporate entity controlling this landmass. And
well, that's it. How can you be inside a corporation anyway, unless you give consent to that?
That's right.
The very fact that you live, you happen to exist in what they define as the area of that corporation is irrelevant. It's a corporation.
That's right. And if you really look at that argument, it goes to, or you can postulate that if that argument was actually correct, when I walk into Walmart, I'm subject to Walmart employee rules because I'm now an employee of Walmart because I'm physically there, which is ridiculous. Nobody is going to believe that.
Exactly. And you can put that to them. There's a fine example of how you shoot down their perceived authority over you.
That's right. So the crux of this whole thing is, don't just accept what they're saying, verify it. Look at it, learn the language, learn the words, learn what the words mean and how they put them together, learn the deceptive practices that they use, and learn what constitutes a contract. One of the things that they used to use when we were dealing with notices of intent and claims of right is they would just say, oh, this has no force and effect. And if you accept that, then yes, it has no force and effect. If you don't accept it, then their argument goes out the window because it's a contract. And it's that simple. I mean, if we brought this up in the last show about the fella in court and he's leaving, walking out, and the judge says, take the toothpick out of your mouth, and he takes it out, and all of a sudden the judge has authority because he did what he said to do. And when you're dealing directly with these people, you have to be very careful with this. And, there is some verbiage you can use. I do this of my own free will and not because you're telling me to do this. Even that's problematical. The best way to deal with this is simply not play, because that way you're not running that risk of making the mistake. And the mistakes are there's more ways to screw up than there is to actually make this work, and the system is designed that way. It's designed to trap you. So really look at the processes, really look at the systems. If somebody says they have a piece of paper that you are bound by, question it. Well, why am I bound by it? Where's my signature? Where's my agreement? Where's my consent to this? And unless you actually did consent to it and signed the paper, and if you signed the paper, you've consented to it. Simple as that. Because if you didn't read it, too bad. It's your own problem. If they hid stuff, if you do read the document and you agree with what's on the document and you sign it, and then they try to add stuff to it, which they commonly call a rider, then you have some authority. You have some reason to invalidate that document if they've changed something on the document. This is the big thing with mortgages. One of the reasons why pretty much every mortgage contract out there is invalid is because it has been altered after the fact. If you sign a contract, there's one copy of that contract with the blue ink signature. It goes to the holder of that contract is the one who has the risk. And in the instance of a mortgage, it's going to be the bank that holds that contract. Now, they are supposed to put it in a file, keep it safe until the end of that, and then they give it back to you. At which point you write settled or, void or whatever, it's done, it's finished. But that's not what happens. What they do is they'll sell it. There will be endorsements on the back. In some instances, they will actually change the content of the document, the content of that contract after the fact without even letting you know about it. And that completely invalidates the contract. Even if it's endorsed, it completely invalidates the contract because now there's information on there that you didn't agree to originally. And it's the same with any contract. If you borrow $10 from some guy and you give him an IOU and he writes a couple extra zeros on it, are you actually now liable for $1,000? No, it's invalid because it's not the same contract you signed. It's the same process with your signature. If they hand you supposed contract, which has a photocopied signature, that's not your mark. That's not your signature. You did not create that mark. So you're not liable for that document. Because, they in most cases, at least in the ones that I've been involved with, you're not getting the entire document. When you get a photocopy of some document, you don't get the whole thing. You don't get both sides. You don't get, if it's a 14, legal size paper, 14-inch paper, you're only getting an 8.5 or 11 inches of that paper. You're not seeing what's on the bottom. So it can't be it's not the contract that you signed, right off the bat. This is not the document that I agreed to. And that's one of, as far as contracts go, that's one of the primary things to keep in mind is that unless they have the original blue ink, unaltered document, it's inactionable. And unless you bring that up, unless you force that issue, they're gonna just write something on a piece of paper and hold you to it. And if you agree to it, then they can do whatever they want. And this is a big point of what we're doing is don't just simply agree. Don't simply assume that what they're doing is correct. Make sure what they're doing is correct. And that's the education part of this. You have to learn what is correct. And then the practical aspect is how to enforce that, how to hold them to it. And that's where it gets tricky because the guys with guns, they don't like being told that they don't have any authority. because they'll just pull out their gun and go, look, this gives me authority. And unless you're willing to get a shot, you're going to just bow down and do whatever they tell you to do, at which point they've got complete control and you're screwed.
Yeah, agreed. Actually, I don't know. Is that worth looking at the elements of a contract there, John? Because, I mean, you talked about mortgages there, and we know from our own experience and from the reality is that mortgages are a fraud right off the bat, right from, as the saying goes, ab initio.
Yep.
Because they don't give you consideration, for one thing, and they don't give you full disclosure. So, you know, two elements of typically 6 elements of a contract. And those elements are quite important because, again, as we mentioned with jurisdiction, all of those elements must apply for it to actually be a lawful contract.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there are some exceptions to that because they now have legal contracts, which can be accepted simply because you didn't object. You know, so there are a number of different legal contracts that they've decided that we now must function under. So we have to be a little bit careful about what type of contract as well it is that we're actually performing under.
That's right, and there's several types of contracts. One is the explicit contract, which is everything is on writing, the meeting of the minds, everything is there, and you agree to these terms, and these terms are immutable. There's adhesion contracts, where if you perform an act, you are liable for something, like parking in an underground parking lot. You know, usually they'll have a sign where you drive in with the terms of the contract. If you go and you accept their terms by parking in their parking lot, you're liable for their terms. There's implied contracts, which are really, really difficult to deal with, and you know that they're hard to define. They're one of the nastier ones to deal with, but they act entirely on assumptions. There's performance contracts where nothing happens until you perform the act, and those are usually for musicians or artists. Actors, contractors, that sort of thing. And, you know, we've all heard stories of contractors who come in and do the work, do a really lousy job, don't finish the job, but yet still get full payment. And because it's written in the contract, the people who sign that performance contract didn't read it, didn't adjust it. Any contract you can apply your own terms to. And this was done, I brought this up a previous show. There was a fella, I believe in Russia, who he got sent in the mail a credit card application. And he reproduced that credit card application so that it looked pretty much identical to the one that they sent him, but it had his terms on it. And he sent it in. The credit card company agreed to those terms and then tried to sue him because he wasn't paying his credit card, which is part of the terms of the contract. And the fellow from Russia won because that was the contract. If you don't read the terms, if you don't study what you're doing, you don't know what you're agreeing to. I mean, this is schoolyard stuff. This is grade 2 things. If you don't know what you're agreeing to and you agree to it, they can do whatever they want. So question it. Please question it. Look at the documents. Read the documents. When you get handed something that they want your signature on, assume that it's not in your best interest. Because chances are it's not. And because you are a party to the contract, you have every right to apply your own terms, provided your terms are honest and honorable and make sense. So I don't know. I can't stress this enough.
Yeah, the big problem though with a lot of corporations, John, is that they give you, a ridiculous contract to sign, and you might even go through it. And you might not agree with some of those terms and say, okay, well, can I change this term? I'm going to put this in here. And there you go. Make your decision on those. And they'll just say, well, no, that's the contract. End of story. If you want our services, that's the contract.
Yep.
And you pretty much know at that point as well that they've got you over a barrel. You either go somewhere else or accept what they have in the contract. But if that's going to be the case, then you better read every single line, especially the small print.
Oh, especially the small print. I mean, this goes two ways. There are contracts where you are seeking their services, and there are other contracts where they're seeking your acquiescence. And what I'm really talking about are the contracts where they say you have to do this. You know, you don't have a choice. It's not that you can't do something. You can't build a house unless you have the contract. It's more along the lines of they are forcing you into a position where you didn't want to be in the first place. And in that respect, don't ask them if you can change the contract. Simply do it. Strike out a clause. Write your own clause. Initial it as a valid change on the document. Send it back. If they don't accept the change, they can't hold you to any contract because you haven't agreed to anything yet. Income tax, for example, right? When you fill out the TD1, that's a contract. You are agreeing to pay taxes. So why not add your own clause to the TD1 that basically says that they are going to justify and provide accounting for every single cent that goes in there, which they're not going to want to do. And if you're paying for something, if it's particularly a public service, you have every right to know where your money's going and what you're paying for. Because otherwise, you just you're handing a criminal organization money. They're going to do whatever they bloody well please with it, unless there's some accountability there. And they do. Yes, most definitely. But if if you find the need, you have to have a credit card, and you go seeking those services, then it's a different animal altogether. You could potentially negotiate if the credit card company is in a position where they really need your business. But in most cases, they don't care. They'll just tell you to go away. In which case, you realize at that point you didn't need it in the first place, because it's a necessity is the mother of invention. So if you find you have a need for some sort of thing, and one of the ways to deal with that is some contract with an organization you do not want to contract with, chances are if you put some brain power into it, you'll find another way around it, another way to do it. I've talked to a bunch of people about this, about starting businesses and getting things rolling that way, and they go, well, I got to go to the bank. I got to get $10,000 or $20,000, and I got to get this started, and they're really not happy about it. And I says, well, why do you need to do that? Why can't you have your customers help you start your business? If it's a service that they want, if it's a service that they are really happy about, they will make sure that you are able to do it. And you may have to start out slow. It may take you a little bit longer, but it's still going to happen. There's always going to be a way around, a way to do this in the private where you don't have to make these ridiculous contracts with organizations you don't want to deal with.
Yeah, especially for money, because any of the financial services that are out there, typically, they're going to, they're a cartel. We know that. So they're going to be applying whatever interest rate that they deem fit for whatever. And you're just going to end up paying more money over the longer period. And okay, you might be able to do this privately, and you might be able to arrange a loan through people that you know privately, and you may give them interest. But for them, it's their money. When you go to a bank and apply for a loan, it's not the bank's money. You create the money when you go for the loan. The money has already been created for these other private individuals. They have that because they've acquired it through other means themselves. And what they what they do with that money is up to them. So if they want to charge you interest, that's fine. But at least you feel probably good about paying back an individual person who is assisting you in starting a new business or maintaining a business, rather than having to go to a faceless corporation who doesn't really give a shit about you. And to be quite honest, the collateral is your business.
Yeah.
So if you can't pay that loan, they come after your business.
Yeah,
So
in that particular instance, when we're looking at that scenario in a little bit more detail, if you do borrow money from grandma and start your business, you also have the option of set off, where grandma can come. If it's, say it's a restaurant, you want to open a restaurant. So grandma puts $10,000 into starting your restaurant for you. And, 3 months later, you realize things aren't going quite as good as you want. And it's going to be really hard to pay grandma back. So you go to grandma and say, hey, look, we're having some issues. How about this? Every time you come to the restaurant, all you need to do is just sign the bill. It's paid, and we will set that off with what I owe you. That's how all of this is supposed to happen in the first place. Because when the government took the resources, when they seized the resources, or better yet, confiscated, and confiscate means to seize without clear lawful authority, when they confiscated the resources of the country for their own purposes, they had to compensate somehow. This is how everything is already paid. I'm sure a lot of you people have heard that, and I'm quite certain a lot of you don't really comprehend how that works. What's supposed to happen when you get a bill is you sign the bill, you send it to the Receiver General. The Receiver General settles the accounts, balances the books, because there is nothing to pay it with. You can't pay a debt with a debt. And I mean, we touched on this at the pre-show discussion, where the $20 bill in your wallet, it's called a bill for a reason. And that's because it is a debt. It is evidence of a debt. It's not value in and of itself. It's actually negative value. So if you want to pay off some debt, the best way to pay it off is with goods or services, because then it's actually paid for. If you pay off a debt with money, all you're doing is transferring the debt to another party. The debt is not gone anywhere. This is, something that people don't really realize, don't really understand. And I mean, the system does kind of work the way it is, except that it's destined to die, because you can't borrow a finite amount of funds for a country and have to pay back more than you've borrowed, because you have to borrow the funds to pay back what you've borrowed, which mathematically it's going to fail. And basically that's what we're seeing here now. So if we work on the barter system, if we work on set off, if we work on discharge, rather than trying to pay a debt, we as general people who are just trying to live will be far better off. And we know the discharge works. We know the set-off works. World Freedmen Society is responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars of mortgages and student loans and car loans and all of that being discharged and set off in the right type of processes. So we know it exists. We know it's there. It's difficult to do. Trust me. It's really hard to get them to agree to this, because they want the dollars. Because most of the people you talk to, they don't have any idea what that $10 bill is. They don't realize it's not value. It's negative value. But they still, I need a $20 bill.
It's evidence of a debt. It literally is evidence of a debt, because all money is borrowed into existence. So at the end of the week, when you've just worked, 60 hours, and you get your paycheck, and it says on it dollars, or you might get paid in cash, you've not actually been paid.
Yes,
because it's evidence of debt.
Yeah, we need to qualify this. When Carl says all dollars are debt, he's talking about the physical bills that you have in your wallet. Okay. Now, the dollars you get when you generate, or when you get a car loan or a PLC or a mortgage, those are still debt, but they're owed to you. because you created the funds. When you sign the promissory note, and if you look it up in the dictionary, you look up money, what is money? There's a whole long list of stuff, and one of them is a promissory note. When you generate that promissory note, you are creating money. And that's where the funds come from to fund your car loan or your mortgage, is they come from you. And since it's a promise to pay, yet there's nothing to pay with, because nobody has piles of gold in their basement, there's no way they can actually recover it. So they demand your energy in the form of these debt notes, the Federal Reserve notes, or in the US, or bank notes in Canada. It's that they're using that as a way of accounting for energy, and they take your energy and they basically destroy you over it, because in most cases it doesn't matter whether you've paid off your mortgage or not. They can still foreclose, and most people don't realize that. Unless you get the promissory note back, you still owe it. If it's still in circulation,
and most people never actually get it back. So
I don't know anybody
because
who
it's
has.
sold on.
Yeah, I don't know anybody.
Well,
who
it's
has.
sold on, so it never happens. And typically, I had conversations several years ago with people who always come in saying, "Oh, I paid my mortgage off years ago, and I had the mortgage." What do they call it? Mortgage paid party. They have that party where they actually destroy the notification at the end to say, "Hey, I've paid off my mortgage," and have a big fire and then dump the notification in the fire. Well, that notification is the only notification that you have that you've applied energy and debt notes and whatever it is to pay back the promissory note that you signed long ago. So most people have no evidence that they actually paid off their mortgage.
That's right.
And neither do they make the changes in the land registry office, where the deed is usually still assigned to the bank, unless you go in and you make that change and say, "No, I paid this off. This is now in my name." But typically, you're still a leaseholder. You're not an owner. The deed is just in your name now instead of the bank's. But that doesn't mean to say you have full control of that. You're still registered to the state.
Yeah, you're another thing. You're not going to get a allodial title. We've been trying for years and years and years. We've got hordes of people working on this, and have been working on this for a long, long time. And you simply will not get a allodial title. You will get equitable title, which means that you get the value of that, but you don't have actual full control over it. But back to what we're talking about, unless you get the note that you created, the promissory note, unless you get it back, you still owe it. And whoever holds it, the holder in due course, is going, at one point, sooner or later, they're going to come back and go, "Hey, I got this promissory note, I want it paid." And since you go, "Well, I've already paid it," they're going to go, "Well, I didn't get paid, and I'm taking your house." And there's folks out there that have been foreclosed on that never had a mortgage. They paid cash for their house, and the bank still foreclosed on it because they have the paperwork. Nobody has actually gone through the process of taking it away from the bank. And it's not a simple thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do, and it's really complicated. But it is doable. It's possible to take away their interest in this. It's just nobody's done it. The rich folks, the folks who understand the process, who understand what money is and how money works, yeah, they're the ones who get away with this stuff because they know how to do this, and they know when to do this. But the average Joe, they're never taught this stuff. And I wouldn't trust anyone to teach it to you. I mean, don't trust Carl and I. All we're doing is giving information. We're giving areas where you can go and do your own research, but you must do your own research. You have to educate yourself, because that's the only way you're going to get the truth of the matter.
Well, one of the big ones with mortgages as well, as you just mentioned a key phrase there as well, the holder in due course. You could typically question any action against you by a bank by counterclaiming, requesting that they prove that they are the holder in due course of the promissory note, because that's what they're using to foreclose against you. And typically they don't have it because it was sold on as a securitized, a mortgage-backed security. So they have a copy, they have a certified copy, but as John pointed out again earlier, it's a copy. It's not the original document with your wet ink or blue ink or black ink signature on it. It's not the original. So they typically will accept that in courts as a certified copy, true copy of the original. But if you stick to your guns enough, and you really, really have to do because they don't like this, you can get them to prove that they are in fact the holders in due course of that promissory note, which they're using to foreclose against you on. If you can do that, and people have done it, you can win in court. But typically the courts and the lawyers and the banks, they're all in collusion on this, and it typically it will be allowed. The certified copy will be allowed, and the original note could be somewhere in China. God knows where it is now.
Well, typically it would be in the Vatican. At least the allodial title documents would be in the Vatican, as far as I understand.
Yes, they would. Yeah.
When we were digging through this stuff, all our paper trails ended at the Vatican, and we couldn't find anything past that point. So we believe, again, we're certainly open to correction on this, but we believe that it's all driven by the Vatican. Now, what Carl just brought up, when they bring up a certified copy or a copy of a document or something like that in court, and the judge says, well, I'm going to accept it, object immediately. And the objection would be that is a forgery. Nobody brings this up. I mean, I've not heard of anybody who has even made that argument that, well, why are you accepting a forgery? Are you, colluding with fraud? Because that's what it is.
Yeah, I actually did that in my case with my house. I didn't mention the word fraud, but I did object quite strongly because I said that is a copy. I don't accept the copy. I've been asking for the original. They've refused to provide the original. Do they have the original in court? Judge looked at the lawyer and, no, we have the certified copy. But we can pull in the witness from the bank who was there to certify that this is a true copy of the original. And I said, I don't care. I want the original. And the judge actually turned around and said, I'm ruling on this. We'll accept the certified copy. End of story.
At which point you hold the judge accountable for fraud. They're not going to like it.
Yeah.
And I mean, you got to stick to your guns when you're doing this stuff. And again, it comes down to risk. Now, you accuse a judge of fraud, he's going to start accusing you of contempt of court. At which point, if you know the contempt rules, there are two types of contempt of court. One is civil contempt, one is criminal contempt. Civil contempt means you are breaching a contract. Criminal contempt means you're causing harm. So, well, I'm charging you with civil, I'll be charging you with contempt. Well, will that be civil or criminal contempt, sir? Oh, that'll be civil contempt. Well, what contract am I breaching? It'll be criminal contempt. Well, what harm am I causing? Right? We've seen this in court where they've tried to switch it because they use deceptive words and languages to get you to agree to stuff that you really shouldn't be agreeing to. And unless you question it, unless you know to question it, they're going to walk all over you. And it's just the way it is. That's ignorance of the law is no excuse. And that's precisely what they're using to deal with you. I mean, if you think about it, it's really dishonorable. If some guy who doesn't understand the language, who doesn't understand the system that's being worked on, say you're in Egypt, right? You do something you think is like totally benign, and you don't cause any harm or anything, and the cops come and grab you and drag you in, and they're doing the entire court case in Egyptian, and you don't have a translator. How can you even possibly defend yourself? How do you even know what they're talking about? They could be charging you with murder, and all you did was drop a gum wrapper on the street. You don't know. And it's the same with any court. Even though they seem to be speaking English, they're not speaking English. They're speaking law, and you need to understand or comprehend the language that they're dealing with. So question everything. This is the point of all of these shows. We can't stress it enough because people don't do it. They assume, and it's the assumptions that are going to knock you in the head every single time. If you question the assumptions fall apart almost every single time. And it's layers upon layers.
The more
upon
witnesses
layers.
you have, the better it is.
Yes, most definitely. If you've got 40 people in the court, in the gallery, they can say clear the court, I would get up and walk out too. Well, you said clear the court, so I'm clearing the court. I'm not part of this bullshit. Or you can, if they say clear the court, you can object. You can't take away my living witnesses. You are you are tampering with evidence. If you do that, you're tampering with evidence. Cell phones. This comes up constantly lately, where the cop, you can't film the cop. The cops comes over, give me your damn phone. Well, no, I'm collecting evidence, and you are not permitted to tamper with evidence. Takes their arguments right away because they're not allowed to tamper with evidence. Simple as that. And when you couch it in these terms, particularly the terms they use against you, they understand what's going on and they realize what's happening. And some of these people are going to go, well, yeah, that's true. So, okay. Yeah. And they're going to start questioning their own processes. And this is really what we want to have happen. We don't want to cause conflict. We don't want to cause any problems. We want to get everybody to start questioning the processes, questioning what they're expected to do, what they're apparently obligated to do, and make sure that they are actually true and correct.
Yeah, the worst problem that we obviously come across is the fact that the majority of the people that are carrying out these processes, to be honest, are our neighbours, family and friends and neighbours and such forth, because they're just employed within the system.
Well,
so getting this information to them is a way of not so much crippling the system, but it's certainly to try and make it change, get them to question the processes and procedures that they're carrying out every single day.
Well, that's the wonderful thing. One of the masterful things about this deceptive system is that it's self-policing. They've got so many people believing that or assuming that what is there is true and correct and the right way to do it, that they will actually get militant if you change the system. I mean, we've seen this with people lawfully traveling. Some guy almost, it doesn't matter where you go. If you have a label on your car that says private, for non-commercial use, no statutory regulation, somebody is going to freak on you. And it's going to be just some Joe average who doesn't comprehend what's going on. And it's a self-policing system. The inmates are actually telling the people who are questioning the jailers that they're not allowed to question the jailers. And in some cases it gets really, really ugly. And that's part of the way the system was designed. It's very sad.
Yeah, it's funny, there was a monkey experiment that was done long time ago that demonstrates exactly that process. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but they had a group of monkeys, and what they would do, they would put bananas up at the top of a cage, and then they would allow the monkeys to go up and grab the bananas, and then it got to a point where they would start spraying high-pressure water on them every time they approached. But they would spray the water on everybody, not just the monkey that was going for the banana. Everybody would get high-pressure water thrown at them. And then occasionally they would keep moving monkeys out and putting new monkeys in. Then it got to the point where all of the monkeys in the cage were completely replaced, but over a period of time, and this process was still going on. But what would happen, they've got all of these monkeys in the cage right now are all different from the original ones. And as soon as any monkey would go up towards to get the bananas, the rest of the monkeys would actually jump on that monkey and stop them.
Yep.
That's what we're talking about. They've got us to that stage now where the monkeys are jumping on the other monkeys to stop them from doing something.
That's right. And it's incredibly sad watching this happen because there's no reason for it. What we should be doing is just, we should be allowed to simply live our lives as long as we do not cause harm, loss, or damage, and supporting our communities. Your chosen community, whether it's a prepper community or a planned community, or it doesn't matter. If you put your effort into the community and make the community better, whether it's a community garden or painting a building or cleaning up garbage, it doesn't really matter. This is what we should be doing. And we'd all have a much better life if we did this. And, support your neighbors, share your resources, share your abilities. And if everybody did this, it would be an awesome place to live. There was a group who did a study, and it was more of just an intellectual exercise, but they realized while they were doing the study that if nothing in society changed except the removal of money, okay, so there was no more $20 bills. There was nothing like that. There was no accounting. Everything was exactly the way it was, except you didn't have the exchange of money. Nothing would change. Society would go on and continue on it exactly the way it is. Now, if we did that now without the background, you would have greedy people who would want 15 cars and 7 houses, and it would be ridiculous. And it would probably collapse. But if nothing, the way we do things now, if nothing changed, it would work just fine. And we see this in tribes in Africa. We see this in tribes in South America, where they're living just fine within their chosen way of life or their traditional way of life. And they don't have money. They don't deal with currency. They don't deal with accounting or any of that stuff. And they're doing just fine. So we know we can do this. We know we can live without the system, provided we have personal responsibility. And if you're responsible...
Yeah, well, what's really happened over the years, the centuries, some pretty smart people who were in positions of power, let's say, and control over a money system, basically decided that it was an easy way to transfer wealth from the people who were doing all the production to the people who control what they use to interact within that production. So the likes of the bankers and, lesser extents now the politicians, but they're just bribed. They're just out and out greed. But everything else is a basis for control. And like you say, if you remove that drive from the system, the greed from the system, it will work perfectly well. But that's what's happened certainly over the last century. Definitely, it's been high-speed greed and the transfer of property and wealth from those who do all the producing and wanted to pass that on to their family, let's say. It's now been passed to the state and passed to the people who now control the world. And there's probably less than 100 people are, super billionaires, and some of them are super trillionaires. We can name names, but that's what's happened. They have all of the money and we do all the work. But now we have nothing to live with.
Oh, certainly. And, we see this daily. In anybody who works for another is participating in that system, because the employer, the owner of the company, he's not taking the least amount that he can out of the company. He's taking the most amount, and he's paying his employees the least he possibly can, and for his maximum profit margin, rather than being fair and paying them a correct percentage of what he's doing. Folks that build houses, you get a group of 3 or 4 people. If they make 3 or 4 houses, build 3 or 4 houses, did they make enough money to buy their own house? No, of course not. They didn't even make enough money to build their own house, because the contractor, who's the one who's getting the lion's share of this stuff, he's not allowing them to do this. And this is, it comes down to the greed aspect of this. I learned this when I was being a toolmaker, making molds and stuff, and I realized that management needs the workers. The workers don't need management. The workers are the ones that pay management's salary. So who's the more important aspect of that business? And the important aspect of that business is the ones who are actually doing the labor, who are producing, who are making that business actually happen. Not the guy upstairs on the phone talking to his buddy and deciding he's going to go play golf tomorrow. Yet the guy who's on the phone talking to his buddy deciding to go play golf tomorrow, he's getting, orders of magnitude more income than the people who are actually doing the labor. This is the greed aspect behind this. And it's if you really break it down, it's completely unfair. But it's the way people have accepted. I don't advocate unions because, again, a union is another control system. But when they were formed, the original concept of the union was a good idea. They just got out of hand because of greedy people. And, some of these unions, they're wanting ridiculous amounts of money for what they're doing. And they don't, anybody who's worked in a mixed situation, road builders or construction workers or anything like that, the private contractors, the non-union people, they bust their butt for their meager amount, and the union guys are sitting there shooting the shit half the day. They don't do the jobs because the system to control the flow of wealth within a manufacturing or a service industry has been co-opted by the unions. And now, instead of the majority of the wealth going to the
employees.
Instead of the majority of the wealth going to the management of the system, a lot of that wealth is going to the union, not the employees of the union so much. Yeah. I mean, they are getting a percentage of it, but they, because of the power they now hold, they believe that they can they're still going to get paid and they don't do their jobs. There's going to be lots of union folk out there that are not going to like that very much. And I agree, it's not systemic. It's pretty widespread, but it's not in every single situation. I've seen some very good unions and, organizations of employees who are honest and who are honorable, who do the work, and they get paid a fair wage for their work. But there's an awful lot out there who don't.
Yeah, I agree. So what about the other concept, though, John, that what we've moved into is a system or a society of employers and employees as opposed to a system of entrepreneurs?
Or, entrepreneurs
you actually work for yourself.
Or private contractors, exactly. And a lot of people, that comes down, in a big way, that comes down to the money, right? When you look at it, everybody and their dog could learn to run their own business and provide services under their own terms with their own clientele. It would probably work really, really, really well. But the ridiculous regulations, the amount of money required to get that thing rolling is limited to a few. And it's a few that are willing to take the risk of, putting everything they have into this and working, 35 hours a day, destroying their health. I don't know any business owner in the first 5 years that doesn't complain about their health is getting bad, their family is upset. They're putting so much time and effort into trying to deal with this business. And it's all about paperwork. It's all about dealing with the regulations. If it was just the business, if you're a farrier and a blacksmith, what do you need to run your business? You need a fire, you need an anvil, a hammer,
Metal.
a small, some metal to work with, a small building, and people to accept your services. You don't have to have the big factory. You don't have to have all of this other stuff. All of the nickel and dime that's killing the businesses are the regulations, the rules and taxes and fees, and it's insane the way the system is actually functioning.
Well, that's it. The government's basically got involved in all commerce, in all business, and attempting to regulate them all to the extent that you can't. I made thinking a prime example the other day where you could go across to China and you could learn, or Japan, for instance, and learn to be an exceptional natural healing masseuse or what's the other one? Acupuncturist. All of these types of things where perfectly adequate, in fact, more than adequate capability to heal and to help people. And you could come back into Canada and into the US or any other westernized, government-controlled country and try and apply that as a business in those countries. And you cannot do it because you didn't go through the registration process. You didn't go through the education process to learn how it's done in this country. And most of that we already know is there just to indoctrinate and to limit the capabilities of those kind of teachings rather than educate to the maximum level. So you could be 100 times better than every other masseuse or acupuncturist around in the area that you operate. But you can't operate because the government says you can't operate because they won't give you a license. And that is a big problem. That's part of the issue and the problems that we face, because you can't even operate as an entrepreneur or a private contractor for the simple reason that anybody who wants to go to you is told, well, you're not licensed.
Yep.
So they say, oh, well, you're not licensed, so I can't deal with you. Go away. You mustn't be all that good because you don't have a license. It's actually the other way around.
There is ways to do what you need to do without having to deal with all of that crap. And one of the easiest ones is a private club. If you have a private club,
private.
Exactly, keep it in the private. If you have a private club with, your members, it's a limited membership. You have to actually agree to be part of that club. Then a lot of these rules, these ridiculous legislations don't apply. We see this with farmers' organizations. We see this with health clubs, with some of the healing centers, where they're not a public entity. They're not open to the public. You have to be a member to get the services, and that changes the rules. Completely changes the rules. So if you are someone in that position where you've got the skills, you've got the drive, you've got the honor and honorability to do what you do well and for the benefit of all, yet you're being blocked by legislation, have a look at a club, a private organization where you can apply your services within that private organization to the private members in a private capacity. And just have a look at it and see what's changing, what changes in that system, because there are ways of doing this. And I was thinking about that last night because I had a little discussion with Danny D from Removing the Shackles last night, and one of the things that came up was I have no idea what I'm going to talk about today. And I was thinking about that last night, and I was thinking of the difficulty of bridging the public and the private. If you've got one foot in each system, it's going to get really complicated. If you live solely in the private, it's very difficult because there's a ton of stuff you can't do. If you live solely in the public, it's very difficult because you are heavily, heavily regulated, and it's going to get really, really expensive. So, none of this is going to be easy until, like I said last week, until we have a lot of people doing this. It's not going to be easy for anybody to actually do this, but it is doable. It is possible to do this stuff. Trying to live solely in the private, which is what I am working as far as possible to do, is problematic. I mean, there are things where, excuse me, it makes sense to me simply to let go of certain services, let go of certain things, because I just don't need the hassle of going through the problems of trying to make it work. But in a strict speaking, if you're living in the private, you shouldn't be accessing public parks. You shouldn't be accessing public transportation. You have no access to support services, welfare, EI. Food banks are private, so that's a little bit different. Health services, because that's all public services, right? If you're living solely in the private, you can't really access all of these services. But there is the concept of private necessity. And if I break my leg, I can't go to my neighbor and have him set my leg. If I know a doctor who's willing to work in the private, then that's fine. But most people don't. So I would have to access the public services in that respect. But it's simply out of private necessity. I'm not going to access those services simply because they're convenient. I'm going to do it because I have no other choice. And that's where private necessity comes in. Money. I still use money. I have, $20 bills sitting on my desk right now. And that is because the stores, I can't go to Safeway across the street and say, hey, I need some groceries. Can I wash your floor? They're not, well, we hire somebody to do that, right? You want groceries, you got to have money. So again, it's a matter of private necessity. Where in certain areas, if you're in a rural area, where, the store isn't across the street, you can go to your neighbor who's got the big garden and go, hey, can I do something for you? I'd like some vegetables. I'd like to do some canning and get some stuff set up for the winter. Is there anything I can do? Can I mow your lawn? Can I dig a hole? I'm good at this sort of stuff. Is there anything like that you need? And quite often, surprisingly enough, you can come to an agreement with these people because, face it, running a farm is a lot of work. And usually they would have to bring in people to help run the farm. And if they've got the neighbors who, instead of paying some migrant worker, arguably a ridiculously low wage to do this sort of labor, if they could support their neighbors and know that if they're in need, they can go to their neighbors and go, hey, I have a problem. Can you come and help? And the neighbors, yeah, no problem. I'll be there in an hour. Way better way to do this. And they're going to agree to this for the most part. If it benefits both parties and it's in the best interest of all involved, they're going to agree to do this stuff. They're
basically told now, aren't they, that they're not supposed to do that. They're supposed to go through, employers, through businesses, through all these other things. They're not supposed to operate in the private. They're not told that it's possible to do so. I mean, I had the same issue with my wife working for a local maple syrup producer. She was working for herself, doing her own things, and they wanted her within their business. I said, well, rather than be an employee, why don't you just go to the owner who wants you to work there and arrange a private contract? You will issue an invoice which will then show on their books, and then that's taken care of as far as they're concerned. And then you are then responsible for whether you need to pay tax on that or whether it's entirely yours based on what it was that she was doing. And the same goes for me working for myself. I operate through private contracts too.
Yeah.
And trying to get people to understand that I don't have to issue an invoice to somebody with HST on it, and I don't have to pay any kind of taxation that they might demand, it's hard work, because they've all been indoctrinated into believing that they must operate in a particular way, and anything outside that is just foreign to them and is completely wrong.
Yeah,
and that's again what we want to try and establish. That you can operate that way. You just have to understand what it entails and the negatives potentially that go along with it.
Yeah, the biggest argument that I've encountered when I'm trying to do that sort of thing, particularly with established business owners, is my insurance won't allow it. And it's almost every single time. The only argument that ever came up was it's going to cause problems with my insurance. And you can take full liability. You can hand them a waiver so that they are not liable for, if you were to damage yourself, it's your own problem. It's you screwed up and you got damaged. But also the employer would have to take responsibility in the case of negligence. If he didn't do the maintenance, if he didn't make sure that the walkways were clear or the floors were clean, he would have to be personally liable for any damages that occurred in that. And that's something that a lot of people simply will not allow. They don't want to be liable. That's why they have insurance, is so that they are not personally liable for their screw ups.
Yeah.
We went through this with car insurance. Before I learned all of this stuff, I was in the system and I did everything the way it was supposed to be, and I was a road star. And I realized as soon as they sent me that letter and I read it, that this is absolutely ridiculous, because I have a free accident. I could kill somebody and I'm not liable for it. And that's when I realized that insurance was a complete farce. It's a bad idea, because I would rather be on the road with 500 people who are absolutely and fully liable for their actions than 500 people who have a free accident. And I think if you really think about it, anybody would agree to that.
Well, you only have to witness the way some people drive down the highway, because they believe the insurance will take care of it no matter what they do.
That's right.
They have no personal responsibility.
That's right. And it's not just with cars. It's not just with businesses. It's with everything. With your house insurance, if your front steps are ragged and rotten and coming apart, and somebody walks up your steps and the steps collapse and they get hurt, yeah, deal with it. You've caused harm. Your negligence has caused a problem. If they're breaking into your, this is another thing that drives me nuts, is if someone breaks into your house and gets harmed while they're stealing your TV, you're liable for it, which is stupid.
Yeah, I agree with that one.
I mean, if you're doing something untoward, you should be holding absolute liability for everything that goes on. And this is part of this ridiculous rules. If you didn't understand this, if you didn't comprehend that, it doesn't matter if they're trying to kill you. If something falls off a shelf and whacks them on the head and they get a concussion, you're liable, and you're going to be paying that person who tried to kill you for the rest of their lives. It's insane, absolutely insane the way this works, and it's because of the surrender of personal liability. Pretty much,
and the
board.
ascension of a litigious society as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, we see that in the States where, you can't walk down the street without risking being sued because people people are greedy. And again, if you really boil it down, it comes down to personal responsibility. These people don't want to be responsible for their own actions, so they're going to blame somebody else, and they're going to nickel and dime them to death until they get satisfaction. And not equity, not the right thing to do, but what they believe their rights are. And none of this has been taught to people, and it drives me nuts. I see it just about every day. People, well, I can do that, it's my right. Well, it's also the person you're affecting's right not to be affected. So where do you draw the line? And sorry about the noise, guys. There's a Harley sitting outside my window. He's leaving. We need to educate. We need to bring this stuff up in discussion. We need to talk about this every chance we can get. I mean, I know it totally destroyed some of my friendships because I just wouldn't stop talking about this, but it was something they needed to hear. And you can't stuff it down somebody's throat. Trust me, it doesn't work. But you can plant a seed. And that's what we're asking everybody to do, is to learn enough to be able to plant the seeds. You don't have to go through the entire process. You don't have to grow the tree. You don't have to harvest the fruit of the tree if you don't want to go that far. But learn how to plant the seeds so that we can start moving this forward. And we have to move this forward because the system that we're in right now, there's one of two options. Either it flourishes and we all become slaves. It becomes 1984, George Orwell, some of these movies that we see on TV where it's a total authoritarian control, or the system completely falls down and we're back to the Wild West. Without the people understanding and embracing the concept of personal responsibility and taking liability for their actions, taking liability for their giving up their rights where they infringe on someone else's rights, we're not going to be able to fix this. And I do not want to see the Wild West come in, because that's not a way to live. And I certainly do not want to see the absolute authoritarian control system come in, because I won't be here. I'll go walk off a cliff somewhere, because I won't live like that. The only way I'm going to live is where I can assist my community and my neighbors, and I can expect and know that if I need the assistance, they will be there to help me too. That's the only way I want to live. And that's the only way I will live. I won't accept anything else.
I don't disagree with you on that one. I completely agree. Because that's certainly the way that I've tried to live. And when we're both pretty much the same age, so I think we've spent a good portion of our lives trying to live that way, moving away from the system as much as we possibly can to differing degrees, but also learning as much about the system as we possibly can. And I think if we can instill that information, that responsibility, that idea and comprehension within those that are listening now and in the future, I think we stand a good chance of doing that, because there are lots of other people out there that want to live the same way that we do. The only difference is that they don't know how to stand for themselves, to stand up against people that are badgering them, that are using authority, perceived authority in most cases, against them, and so on. So the whole point is to be able to get people to live the way we want to live, the way they want to live, and to use some tools to help them to do it. So I agree. If we get to the point where total authoritarianism becomes the norm, which is what they want, from what I can see, it's a world I don't particularly want to live in either.
No.
And I think at that point I would be actively engaged in more physical attrition against them.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can belabor this point over and over and over again, and I want to kind of move away from it if we can come up with something else to move to at this point. I think we got our point across.
Yeah.
If we didn't, I'm sorry. It's probably going to come up again because this is the core of the whole thing, right down to it. And it's one thing to question the authority. It's another thing to accept the authority where the authority is correct. And you got to know the difference. So that's where it is.
Well, again, contracts, isn't it? If you made an arrangement and an agreement, if you don't know that you made an agreement or one's been forced on you that has been changed, then you have to know that too.
That's right. Okay. Well, we got about a half an hour left. Is there anything else you want to go into with this, Carl? Anything you want to bring up or stories to tell?
Oh, I'm sure we have lots and lots of stories that we can go through for stuff that we've delved into over the years. I suppose what we could probably do is, I don't know, have you got any suggestions of particular websites maybe that people might want to look at to give them a sort of a guideline as to where to go? I mean, of course, we've mentioned the World Freeman Society quite a lot. That's not as active a forum as it once was, but there's still some really, really good information there. FMOTL, Freeman on the Land in the UK.
TPUC.
What's the other ones? Yep, TPUC is another good one. They have some really good... Oh, Get Out of Debt is another one too,
yep.
Although they have a focus that kind of leads more towards the debt issue and how to get people out of debt. Some of that can be pretty dicey, so that's getting information that helps you stand up against the bailiffs, for instance, and question the court orders and all these other authorities and letters that you might end up receiving. But if you have an obligation to pay something, then technically speaking, you should be paying it. That's not being honourable.
That's right.
But if something's been forced on you, then fair enough. That's a different case.
Yeah, there's another U.S. site called What Lies in Your Debt, and that goes quite heavily into depth of where the deception is, and what to look for as far as the deceptive acts and practices that are used against you.
And don't use that site for Canada because pretty much the laws and the rules and everything they talk about on that particular site refer specifically to U.S. states and the like.
Yeah.
They have tried, I think, to make a transposition into Canadian law, but it's not the same. The acts and statutes of protections that are available in the US don't quite apply in Canada. You might have to use it as a basis for knowledge, but you have to look elsewhere. Don't try using their procedures and their paperwork, let's say, because it just won't work in Canada.
That's right. It'll require some cross-referencing, but it'll give you an idea of where to look. And that's really all we can do is give you an idea of where to look, what to look for, and you will find your own information concerning this. When I was teaching with the World Freeman Society, one of the things I would not do would be to tell someone, go here, read this, that's your remedy. I would say, go here, read the site, find what interests you and embrace that. Because every one of us has slightly different interests. Some people are into the financial stuff. Some people are into the regulation aspect of it. Some people are into the contract aspect of it. So when you do your research, you're going to be focused on where your focus is at that moment. And you're going to get specific information for that. You're also going to get a fairly broad spectrum of information, which is going to adjust your interests. And this is an organic process that we're going through, this learning process. So we don't want to say, this is how to do it. There's no cookie cutter, guaranteed. There is no cookie cutter method. You can't just file a paper and it's done. It has to be tailored for the situation and for your understanding, for your comprehension, for your specific situation. So when you do your research, be broad in your research. Look at some of the concepts that we're bringing up and research those concepts on your own. Because you're going to find stuff that we didn't find. You're going to find stuff that's more relevant to your specific situation than what we could point to. And this is why you need to educate yourself. If you go to school for this, if you learn from a book, you're going to get that perspective and only that perspective. If you educate yourself, you're going to get your perspective. And depending upon the kind of research you do and how broad you want to be in your perspective determines how well-rounded your information is going to be. Now, Carl, you had mentioned, just as an aside, this isn't a very long thing to do, but it's something I think that's important that needs to come out, and that is the concept of jury nullification. This is something that's come up. It's come up in the public a couple of times over the last few years, and it as soon as it comes up, it gets buried because it's incredibly powerful. It's not well used because very, very few jury trials actually occur anymore, especially in Canada. I don't think I've heard of a jury trial in Canada in at least 20 years. So,
yeah, the majority of them end up at Queen's Bench or something. Who's a judge presiding.
Yeah,
barristers with wigs and, very officious-looking, scary places, but they don't have a jury of your peers typically.
That's another thing that came up when I was doing my research is the concept of the funny hat, and it's amazing how much power the funny hat has. If you look at the perceived authorities, they've all got a funny hat. And it's a goofy looking hat. It's a hat that nobody else is going to wear. It's not a fashionable thing. It's just a funny hat, and it's a joke, yes, but there's some truth behind it. In that, if you wear a funny hat, people look at you differently. They are going to perceive you in a different light, and it amazes me how much power these funny hats have. Anyway, back to the original topic, the jury nullification. Yeah. Oh, sorry. You want to say something, Carl?
No, sorry. I was just agreeing with you on going back to the original.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. The concept of jury nullification, when you're in a jury trial, the jury is the law, and their decision is supposed to stand. And this is in the basis of common law, where the community decided what the standards of why can't I think this morning? The standards of conduct are within that community. Some communities, you could plant a garden in your front yard. Some communities, they wouldn't like that. And this is the concept of the jury trial. And the idea of jury nullification is if what the defendant is being charged with offends the conscience of the jury can just say not guilty regardless of what happened, regardless of the facts. They can waive the charges, and the legal system doesn't want you to know this. If you're it came up in a discussion yesterday. How do you get out of jury service? And one of the easiest ways to do it is you ask them, what would happen if I brought up jury nullification? And pretty much guaranteed they're just going to rubber stamp, gotta get out of here, you're out, you're not on the jury, because they do not want anybody to know about this. This was used.
Yeah, and typically what happens though, John, isn't it, is when the court proceeding, the court case, and the judge will give his summation to the jury, and they always, as part of that summation, say you must look at the points of the law and find your decision based on those points of the law. They don't tell the jury that, well, if you think the law sucks, you can acquit him They just don't do that. But that's in essence what we're saying can happen.
Oh, most definitely. And you know, it must be unanimous as far as I understand. And I do recall in the States a situation where this was actually used. And I think it was a cannabis case. And because the individual was using cannabis to deal with a multitude of physical and medical issues, the jury agreed that, you know, the law in this instance, the charges this man was being charged with were excessive, were outrageous, and they acquitted regardless of the facts. And this guy, according to the rule of that law, he was totally guilty, like totally. Because the mitigating circumstances, the jury, it was against the jury's conscience to say, yeah, well, we'll put this guy in jail for 20 years for, you know, trying to deal with his medical issues. And this is the power of jury nullification. In Canada, I think, Carl, you brought up you can't ask for a jury trial or demand a jury trial unless your charges are, or unless the penalty for what you're being charged with is in excess of 5 years imprisonment. So, you know, chances are you're not going to be able to do it. And I think in most cases where the jury trial is actually warranted, the jury nullification is probably only going to be a viable option in a small percentage of the cases. Because in most cases, you know, when you have a jury trial, especially in Canada, with something like that, it's going to be a big thing. It's going to be a murder. It's going to be, you know, something outrageous. And not saying that a murder is not available for jury nullification. If the fellow was fully justified in defending himself, and it just so happens that the guy who attacked him made the choice of killing himself because he attacked the guy, then certainly jury nullification could be a viable option there. But it's again, it's a case by case thing. I can't really even give a blanket explanation of this. I have to go with specific cases and how that works. But just be aware, it's there, it's available. It's something they do not want you to know about. Again, there's a lot of stuff in the legal system where they don't want you to know about. And if you know about them, you can make a mess of their system. Not to get away with anything, but to make sure that what does happen happens for the right reasons. Not simply control, not simply assuming you're guilty and rubber stamping it. But if you did it and you're liable for it, and you have a victim, then go to your victim and say, look, I'm sorry, how can I fix this first? Because that's the honorable thing to do. And if you can't come to a solution, then an arbitrator is brought in. That's what the courts are supposed to be. But because it's a money-making thing, they don't let you do the honorable process. They just come and slap you and put you in cuffs and stick you in a hole and basically anything you say is held against you, which is absolutely true. So we can't really go on too much with the jury nullification. Just be aware it exists. It is an option if you're in that situation. And I'll bet you if you even mentioned it in any of your arguments, if you're a defendant and you bring it up, you're going to get yelled at, even though it is entirely your right, provided it actually applies. Be honorable about it. If you're
well, typically the idea would be that you would be a jury member. I mean, if you wanted to get out of jury duty at all,
bring it up.
Just mention it. Yeah, bring it up, and you're out of there because they don't want you to know it and don't want you to bring it up. But if you do happen to be a juror and you're going through a case, and literally the evidence and the content of the case itself basically offends your conscience. And the case that John brought up, I think the reason that this guy was potentially going down for 20 years was it's something like the 3 strikes and you're out rule.
Yeah.
And he'd been arrested and convicted previously for the possession of this stuff. and this was kind of his third offence, and he was going to prison for 20, 25 years. And of course, it was completely against the moral standing of all of the jurors to have this poor guy who was going through such medical dire straits, hell, yeah. And the only thing that was giving him any kind of relief was to partake of cannabis, which had a wonderful effect. It didn't really give him his quality of life, but certainly made it better than anything that the medical establishment were giving him. So he just refused to accept that there was anything wrong and kept getting it, and unfortunately kept being arrested until this particular time. And the jury, which fortunately did know about this process, said we're not convicting him.
Yep.
And it was a unanimous decision. Sorry, yeah, by the rules that you'd laid down, Judge, if we follow those rules and the law that gave us, he's guilty, but I'm sorry, he's not. We're not finding him guilty. And that's exactly what jury nullification is. So if you happen to be on a jury and it offends yours and a number of other people's sensibilities, and there's a disagreement going on because you've got a group of people there saying, by the letter of the law, this guy is guilty, and you say, but morally, he's not guilty. Morally, the poor guy is having, or woman is in bad straits, and then you can turn around and get the rest of the jurors to say, well, this is an option. Don't listen to what the judge has just told you, that you must find him guilty or not guilty using the letter of the law. That's not true. You can find him not guilty simply because you don't believe that the law that he's been judged under is fair. Well, that's jury nullification.
I mean, you said the judge said you got to find him guilty or not guilty according to the letter of the law. Jury nullification is according to the letter of the law. So you're following instructions exactly the way you're supposed to.
Yes.
They're just not going to let you know what the letter of the law is. They use all these buzzwords. They use all these fancy terms, and they don't bother defining any of this stuff. They don't tell you what the letter of the law is unless you know it. And the only way to know it is to do the research and to study it and to learn for yourself what's available to you. In most cases, especially with stuff like this, you only need to know a few things. You need to understand the clean hands doctrine, which is the one who enters with clean hands is the one who should be winning, who should prevail in the situation. And you need to understand the conscience aspect of this. If it offends your conscience, it cannot be against the law. I mean, or if the law offends your conscience, it cannot be upheld, I should say. And other than that, I mean, a lot of this stuff, it's common sense. And if you really think about it, if you honestly think about it, you can see where the problems are, and you can formulate your own solutions just by using common sense on this. Now, the procedures, because they use very specific procedures, you may have a procedural error, in which case you can just say, well, where's the defect, and correct the defect. And it hasn't nullified the process. It's just there's a defect in the process, and now we'll point it out and I'll correct it. Most of the time, they're not going to point it out. So you kind of need to know what you're doing. And it's better if you don't have a defect in your process to begin with. So, the education aspect of this is crucial. But you don't have to spend 30 years, 8 hours a day studying constantly, because a lot of this just comes down to common sense. Which, unfortunately, I hate to say this, but I know it's probably going to get yelled at, but it's sorely lacking in society today. Common sense isn't common anymore. Unfortunately. I mean, it did.
Yeah. Well, if you're going to get shouted at, I'm going to laugh, and I'm going to get shouted at too, because I agree with you. I mean, it's just incredible.
Well, I mean,
Sorry, go ahead, John.
I have to qualify this and say that yes, we do make a number of generalizations, and we realize they are generalizations, and we realize it doesn't always happen that way.
Yeah.
But when we make the generalization, it's because it's the most common occurrence. And we recognize this, we realize this, and we applaud the people who don't fall into that category because they are paying attention and they're doing, they're putting the effort into educating themselves and questioning their own way of doing things. And those people we applaud totally. We don't lump them in the same category as what most of the people that we talk about. But if you walk down the street, if you're just walking down the street observing people, the vast majority of these people are freaking clueless zombies. I hate to say it, but it's the truth. And if you're honest with yourself, if you're honest with your own observations, you're going to see it too. And that's
I have a little process that I go through sometimes when I'm, sat somewhere in the car or sat outside just watching people, and I just call it people watching. And I see how they act, how they interact with other people, and just, I know it's stereotypical, but there are certain types of people that you can see, certainly by the way they dress, by the way they act, what it is that they happen to be using, walking down the street, looking down at a phone and paying no attention to the sidewalk or when they even reach the crosswalk. This is what we talk about with the common sense and certain people act. And that's not saying everybody else, or everybody is like that. That's certainly not the case. But you can see the different types of people just by staying quiet yourself and just watching those that that are walking around you. And you can see the different types of people. You can get a feel of what types are walking around you.
Yeah, and
it's scary sometimes.
Oh, yes, big time. To be fair, we have to realize that in a lot of instances, this type of behavior is a social convention that's been imposed on these people.
Yeah.
Danny, one of the discussions I had with Danny last night was she's a homeschooler. She's got 4 kids. And there's a group of a whole bunch of people around where she lives that are also homeschoolers, and the kids have not been vaccinated. They have good food. They don't eat processed food for the most part. They haven't been in the public school system. They haven't been indoctrinated yet. And she was amazed. She just had a birthday party for one of her sons, and there was 15 kids under like between I think 8 and 14 or 8 and 15 there. Which, in most instances, your average parent would cringe when they heard that, because there's going to be conflict, there's going to be crying, there's going to be kids locked in the closet, there's going to be ostracization, there's going to be issues. And she said, yeah, it was loud, but it was incredibly peaceful. Everybody got along. None of the expected behavior that you would normally or typically look for or be concerned about wasn't there. There was no fights. There was no arguments. Everybody got along. Everybody was wonderful. And because these kids haven't been indoctrinated into the social conventions. They were taught by their parents to be kind and honest and generous, and they reflect that in their dealings with each other. So to be fair, when I'm sitting in the park bench and I'm watching the zombies walk around, I feel sorry for them. I don't blame them because I don't blame them entirely because a lot of it is simply social conventions that's been imposed upon them. Now, there is some liability there because it still is a choice. And in a lot of cases, they don't realize they have the choice. So I can cut them some slack there too. But when we talk about these folks, we're doing so in a way or with the intent of getting them to look at themselves honestly. And if you're one of those folks who does that, they walk down the street, they're staring at their phone, they have no idea what's going on around them, they got the headphones on, the music's up loud, and you walk into a post, yes, people are going to laugh at you. But why are you doing that? Honestly ask, why are you so stuck on this little electronic device that the outside world no longer exists? And oh man, the thoughts are coming so fast I can't even make words on this right now. And
well, let me just jump in, because what I just said and what you've just said, the people realistically that are coming to listen to what we're talking about here, I don't think you could put in that kind of category, because they wouldn't be here.
Carl, we're all doing it. I do it. You do it. We all do it to some degree. And
to some degree, exactly, yeah. But, I'm talking about the people that everything that they do is, as you pointed out, zombified. They're complete zombies. They have limited interaction with society unless it follows a specific convention. Once they leave that convention and think for themselves, then the more like we are, where, they're questioning the surroundings, they're questioning the interactions, and they deal with people differently. They have the personal responsibility, and they interact with people differently.
Yep.
They see things differently. So there are lots of other people that are obviously coming and listening to what we're talking about that I would definitely put in that category, because if they weren't, they wouldn't be listening to us. They would be following those multitudes of conventions that society is programming everybody with. And yes, some of the programs stick, and we'll end up listening. I mean, we're using electronic equipment right now. It's part of what we're doing. But it's not to our detriment that we're doing that, and it's not to other people's detriment, I hope, that we're doing that either.
Well, I'm sure there's going to be a few out there that think that the information we're providing is definitely detrimental to their existence.
Well, yeah.
But it's,
in that sense, I agree, I suppose.
But even those folks, even the folks who are on the other side, if there are sides, who are immured in the control system, who are profiting from the control system, if they were to look at their situation honestly and honorably, they would realize they'd have a much better life if they got out of that. Because a lot of these, one of the things that came up when the lottery system was brought out is that people began to realize it doesn't matter how much money you have, you're still going to be miserable. And I looked at that, and I heard that concept, and I started looking at that, and I realized the people who have nothing are the happiest people I've ever met. And it's the ones who...
Yeah, I mean, you can see that. You can see that all the time when you look at the tribes of Africa and the children and so on. In some of the what you would consider to be the worst conditions imaginable, to them it's not. They have wonderful freedoms, and they're incredibly happy and generous people.
Yep.
Whereas, downtown Ottawa and downtown Toronto, not like that at all.
Oh, no, not at all. Everything, I realized really early, everything that we perceive, everything that we have been taught is exactly backwards from the way it's supposed to be. The legal system destroys law. The health system destroys health. The agricultural system destroys the quality of your food. Everything is backwards. And I haven't yet seen one system, imposed system, a learned system that isn't like this. And right from the core concepts of each one of these systems, it's exactly backwards to the way we should be living. And it's,
Yeah, I used to call it, well, still do call it, the 180-degree systems.
yeah, exactly.
That's the terminology I use.
And
so yeah, I agree with you exactly. And you can, as you pointed out, you can see it in everything that we can perceive. I'm not necessarily thinking that other people can perceive it the same way, because they sometimes think, well, this is right. The healthcare system, this is the correct system. This is wonderful. But actually, we know differently.
And well, if they're looking at a system and they're, especially an imposed control system, either they don't have all the facts or they're simply not being honest with themselves. Because it doesn't matter what system you look at, whether it's business, whether it's law, whether it's health, agriculture, even meteorology for that matter, you will see, if you're honest with yourself and you honestly look at the information that's presented and you get enough information, because if you look at it in a vacuum, yeah, it's going to seem pretty normal. But if you get a sufficient volume of information in it, you will see that it is exactly backwards to the way it should be. Society, the Western society, the so-called advanced societies are all like this. Every single one of them has been built in that fashion, where if you look at what we call the primitive societies, they operate really, really well. And everybody is taken care of. They have very little disease. They have very little issues. Sure, they live in grass huts and they walk around barefoot all day, but they're happy. They are ecstatically happy people. They don't have the issues. They don't have the stresses that we're involved in. And they don't seek the same sort of garbage that we do. I mean, how many people or stories have you heard about some teenager, mid-teenager, 16, 17 years old, that freaks out because he didn't get a new iPad?
Yeah.
And goes off for weeks and weeks and weeks because he didn't get this. And his life is miserable. It's destroyed. Who cares, right? Is that, in 10 years, is it really going to matter? But the stress that he creates at that moment in 10 years is going to matter. Because when you learn how to live in that kind of stress, it just continues to build and build and build until it kills you. Learn to let go. Learn to let go. Learn to be happy with having your needs met. Now, you don't need an iPad. You may need communication. But that communication, I remember when communication was a pencil and a paper. And there are kids out there who do not know what a typewriter is. They do not know how to write a letter. It's gone. It's lost. And that's incredibly sad to me, because it's a wonderful thing. When I was young, I was interested in aeronautics. And my father says, okay, well, there's the library. Look up aeronautics. And I learned how to find the information myself. And, the internet, sure, it's a tool. It's a wonderful thing. It's the biggest library on the planet sitting right on my desk. If you use it as a tool, then it's a wonderful thing. If you use it as a way of life, it's problematic because it's eventually going to break. Your computer's going to die, and then you're going to stand there with your thumb up your nose going, what am I going to do? I don't have my computer. Rather than going, okay, well, I don't have a computer. Oh, let's go to the library. And you go to the library and you get the same information. A lot of the stuff that makes life awesome, and learning is one of the most wonderful things I can do, is to learn something new. The stuff that makes life awesome, that makes life fantastic, that makes the sunsets even more gorgeous than they are, is being removed by the gadgets, the social conventions, the peer pressure. How can we get past that? Is there any way to get past that other than just completely ruining the system, breaking it completely down and starting from scratch? Can we step back and just say, okay, it's a tool, awesome. It's a nice tool. I don't need it all the time. It's not going to run my life. If the tool breaks, is there another way to do it? I mean, 30 years ago, if you're a carpenter and your hammer breaks, you went and got a rock and you kept working. Today, your hammer breaks, the work stops. I got to go get a hammer, but I don't have any money, so I'm taking a week off. I mean, it's wow.
Yeah. They've removed the processes of learning that we used to have, where there was the manual, there was the encyclopedia, because that's the way I learned. I had a full library that my dad had bought, full library of Encyclopedia Britannica, and I went through them and I read the damn things and I read the dictionary.
Yep.
So I looked up what words meant.
Yeah, that was.
So there were lots of different things, and I agree with you. The learning process, to me, I'm like a sponge for knowledge, and my desire to learn new things and understand things is immense.
Yeah, that was.
And I don't understand why other people are not like that.
It was one of my favorite things to do when I was a kid. I lived on a farm 10 miles out of town, just nothing but prairie around me. And I'd get bored, so I'd just go and grab an encyclopedia and just read through the encyclopedia. I can't count how many hours I did that. I mean, that's not everybody's thing, certainly. But some people are going to be interested in gardening. Some people are interested in plants. Some people are interested in woodworking. Some people are interested in aeronautics. It doesn't matter what you're interested in. Pursue it, chase it, and if but don't chase it to the point where it becomes your entire world. Because there's a million things out there that are really interesting and really cool, and sitting there staring at an iPad. I mean, how many times or I'm sure everybody has seen the joke about the family sitting around the dinner table and everybody is on their iPads. And, it's like you text your mom across the table, pass the salt. Right?
Yeah.
Extreme example, but it happens. And that it's absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. So let's end there. Leave everybody with a bit of a laugh, and invite everybody back next week. Please come in. We need some live people in the room here so that we can have an actual discussion. Some of the points we bring up, we need to actually look at other people's
looking at their circumstances and situations.
Well, their perspectives.
For us to, that too.
Looking at others,
like the question and answer options.
Exactly, looking at other people's perspectives, and because everybody's got their own perspective, and what we're bringing out, what Carl and I are talking about, is our perspective of this. And who's to say that's correct? The only way we can come up to a broad perspective is to have broad perspectives brought in, or a number of perspectives brought in, so we can look at each one. So please come on in. The links are on there. There'll be a page on rts.earth specifically for Essentio Mentium, and we'll put the information and how to get in touch with us on the shows on that page. As time goes by, we'll be expanding our reach, and you'll be able to find us in more places. So thanks, Carl. Awesome discussion today, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, same time next week. Thanks again, John. Appreciate it. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.